The most watched show of the 1990s was nearly canceled before anyone outside NBC had seen a single frame of it. The cast that became a cultural institution almost wasn't assembled, and the character that gave the show its emotional spine was the one the network wanted removed. That was Friends, and the story behind it is stranger than anything that happened on that orange couch. Today, 15 facts about Friends, from the character almost written out before the pilot aired, to the salary negotiation that changed how Hollywood pays actors forever, to the cast member fired from another show the exact week she was cast in this one. Stick around for the bonus. 10 seasons, $1 billion, confirmed in a parking lot in 5 minutes by accident. Fact 1. It started as Insomnia Cafe, and almost nobody in it was who you know. The original pitch document was titled Insomnia Cafe. Then it became Friends Like Us. Then 6 of 1. It finally landed on Friends just before the pilot aired, a title NBC executives considered too generic to be memorable and pushed back on until the last possible moment, but the name was the least of it. In the original concept, the show centered on 4 characters, not 6. None of them were named Ross, Rachel, Monica, Chandler, Joey, or Phoebe. The ensemble that became one of the most recognizable casts in television history was assembled through a casting process that kept finding better options than the ones the creators had originally imagined, right up until the week before they started filming. Fact 2. The character NBC wanted to cut became the show's entire spine. In early development, network executives were concerned about Ross Geller. Too sad, they said. Too fixated on his failed marriage. Too emotionally heavy for a light, fast-paced comedy. The suggestion was made more than once to reduce his role significantly, or remove him entirely. Crane and Kaufman refused. Ross stayed. His decade-long pursuit of Rachel became the emotional architecture of the entire series, the storyline that gave the show its stakes, its longing, and ultimately its ending. The character NBC wanted to cut was also the reason 52.5 million people watched the finale. The executives who wanted him gone never quite lived that down. Fact 3. 6 actors rewrote Hollywood's salary rules in one afternoon. By season 3, Jennifer Aniston and David Schwimmer were significantly more famous than the rest of the cast. NBC offered different salaries to reflect the hierarchy. The 6 cast members responded by doing something almost unprecedented in television. They negotiated as a single unit, telling the network that unless every member received equal pay, none of them would sign. NBC had no leverage. The show was one of the most watched on television. They agreed. By the final seasons, each cast member was earning $1 million per episode, the highest salary ever paid to television actors at that point. The negotiation strategy became the template for ensemble cast deals across the industry for the next 2 decades. Friends didn't just change what its own actors were paid, it changed the calculation for every television ensemble that came after it. Fact 4. The apartment was financially impossible, and the writers knew it the whole time. Monica's 2-bedroom apartment in Greenwich Village, with those ceilings, that square footage in that neighborhood, was financially impossible for a chef in her mid-20s. The show addressed it directly. The apartment was rent-controlled, having been passed down through Monica's grandmother. The explanation was delivered as a throwaway line and never revisited. What the show didn't mention, even rent-controlled apartments in that building, in that location, in the 1990s would have been well beyond what the characters could afford. The writers knew the math didn't work. They gave audiences the minimum possible explanation and trusted them to want the apartment more than they wanted the arithmetic to add up. They were right. Fact 5. The pilot had a 7th character nobody remembers. The pilot episode included a character named Paul the Wine Guy, Monica's date, given enough screen time and dialogue to suggest he was being set up as a recurring presence in the show's romantic landscape. He appeared in the pilot. He was never seen again. No explanation was offered. No character arc was closed. He simply stopped existing between episode 1 and episode 2, as the writers quietly realized the show's center of gravity had nothing to do with whoever Monica was dating. Fact 6. Chandler's laugh was the writer's unofficial quality test. During table reads, the writing staff used Matthew Perry's reaction as a live gauge of whether a joke was working. Perry had a completely involuntary laugh. Genuine, uncontrollable, impossible to fake, that appeared only when something was actually funny. If he laughed, the joke stayed. If he didn't, it needed work, regardless of what anyone else in the room thought. The irony. The character most associated with sarcasm and deflection was performed by the cast member whose authentic emotional responses were the most transparent. Chandler couldn't hide his feelings, neither could Matthew Perry. The writers built their quality control system around that fact. Fact 7. Lisa Kudrow was fired from one show and cast in another in the same week. The week Lisa Kudrow was cast as Phoebe Buffay, she was simultaneously let go from her recurring role on Frasier, where she had been playing Roz before being replaced by Perry Gilpin. The 2 events happened within days of each other. Perry Gilpin got the role of Roz. Kudrow got Phoebe. Both decisions were correct for both shows. What's stranger is the timing. The firing that looked like a professional setback freed Kudrow's schedule at exactly the moment Friends needed her. Had Frasier kept her, she wouldn't have been available. The show that let her go put her in exactly the right room at exactly the right time. Fact 8. The show accidentally created a global coffee shop franchise it didn't own. Within a few years of Friends' peak popularity, coffee shops trading on the Central Perk name and aesthetic had opened in cities across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, most of them unlicensed, operating on the assumption that the brand was too dispersed to enforce against. The show had created a franchise without planning one. More significantly, Friends contributed to a genuine shift in how urban 20-somethings thought about coffee shops. The idea of a large, comfortable, always available third space, not home, not work, just a place where your people were, was something the show depicted so consistently and so warmly that it became aspirational. Starbucks has been credited with popularizing that model in America. Friends exported it to the rest of the world. It didn't even sell coffee. A character almost removed who became the show's entire emotional spine. A salary negotiation that rewrote Hollywood's rulebook. And a coffee shop franchise that appeared around the world without anyone's permission. We're not halfway through. Still coming. The guest star whose scenes were rewritten out of pure intimidation. The couch that was always free. And the one prop that explained everything. And the bonus. 6 people in a parking lot, 5 minutes, and the decision that nobody planned but everybody needed. Fact 9. The guest star so famous. The writers rewrote her scenes out of nervousness. Julia Roberts appeared in the second season episode broadcast immediately after Super Bowl, watched by 52.9 million viewers. She was, at that point, the biggest female film star on the planet. The writing staff knew she was coming weeks in advance and revised her scenes repeatedly, not because the material wasn't working, but because the pressure of writing for Julia Roberts produced a specific creative paralysis that resulted in draft after draft after draft. The episode was one of the highest rated in the show's history. It was also, by multiple accounts, the most anxiously assembled. Sometimes intimidation produces better work. Sometimes it just produces more drafts of the same scene. This was both. Fact 10. The haircut that defined a generation, and the woman who wore it for 9 years against her will. In season 1, Jennifer Aniston's hairstylist gave her a layered, highlighted cut that became known simply as the Rachel. Within months, it was the most requested hairstyle at salons across the United States. Clients would bring in photographs of the character rather than the actress. Rachel Green, not Jennifer Aniston, had become the reference point. Aniston has since said she found the cut difficult to maintain and didn't particularly like it after the first season. The hairstyle that defined a decade of fashion was worn reluctantly by the person whose head it was on for approximately 9 more years. The Rachel outlasted Rachel's own enthusiasm for it completely. Fact 11. The most watched finale of its era had a secret first screening nobody knew about. The series finale aired on May 6, 2004, to 52.5 million Americans. Before it reached them, the 6 cast members watched it together in private, gathered in a screening arranged specifically for them, watching the last episode as an audience before the rest of the world was allowed in. It was the same instinct that had driven the salary negotiation, the 6 of them, together, before anyone else. The cast that had spent a decade refusing to be ranked against each other ended it exactly the way they had worked, in a room, as a unit, before the doors opened. Fact 12. Why was the most popular couch in New York always free? The orange couch at Central Perk, permanently available in a busy New York coffee shop, waiting reliably for 6 specific people at any hour of the day, was acknowledged in exactly 1 episode. A reserved sign appeared briefly in the background, visible for a few seconds, never mentioned in dialogue, never referenced again. The writers had included it specifically to preempt the question that had been raised internally. They knew the couch made no sense. They put in the smallest possible acknowledgement and moved on. Audiences accepted it completely. 1 background prop seen once was enough to make 20 years of implausibility disappear. Fact 13. How does a show earn more after it ends than while it was airing? Friends was sold into syndication before it had finished its original run. By 2004, it was generating more revenue through reruns than through its NBC broadcast. TBS paid enormous sums for the rerun rights and recouped them comfortably. Friends became one of the most profitable catalog properties in television history, earning hundreds of millions annually long after the cast had moved on. The cast had negotiated brilliantly for their salaries. The people who owned the show made considerably more, from deals that had nothing to do with anyone's per-episode rate. $1 million per episode sounds like the end of the negotiation. In the catalog business, it was just the beginning. Fact 14. Why is a show from 1994 one of the most streamed series of the 2020s? Friends ended in 2004. 20 years later, it consistently ranks among the most streamed television series on Netflix and HBO Max, watched predominantly by audiences who were children or not yet born when the finale aired. The show's specific combination of comfort, familiarity, and the fantasy of effortless friendship in an endlessly available apartment proved to be exactly what streaming audiences reach for when they want something that feels safe. Netflix reportedly paid $100 million to keep the show for a single additional year before it moved to HBO Max, more than the entire production budget of multiple seasons combined. A show made 30 years ago about 6 people in New York is now a streaming asset so valuable that platforms bid 9 figures for the rights. The couch is still reserved. The coffee is still hot. Fact 15. Before the pilot aired, one person on set genuinely didn't think it would work. In the weeks before the pilot, the cast gave numerous press interviews. Most expressed cautious professional optimism. David Schwimmer gave an interview in which he expressed genuine uncertainty about whether the show would find an audience, not as false modesty, but as honest assessment from an actor who had seen pilots come and go. He was playing the character NBC had wanted to cut. He was uncertain the show would last. The network had doubted Ross. The actor playing Ross doubted the show. Both were wrong, and both were wrong in exactly the same direction, underestimating something that turned out to be one of the most durable pieces of entertainment of the last 30 years. And now the bonus I've been saving for last. This one begins in a parking lot and ends with NBC stopping arguing. In the early casting stages, the network had strong opinions about who should be in Friends, and those opinions were frequently at odds with the creators' instincts. The network preferred different actresses over Jennifer Aniston for Rachel. They had reservations about Matt LeBlanc for Joey. They weren't sure Matthew Perry was funny enough on camera. The casting process was long, contentious, and full of alternatives that came close to happening. The moment that resolved everything happened by accident. After a chemistry read, the creators, the casting directors, and the relevant network executives all happened to be outside at the same time. In a parking lot, not in a screening room, not in a formal presentation. The 6 people who would become the cast were gathered informally, standing next to each other, talking. The chemistry was immediate. The dynamic that would sustain 10 seasons, 236 episodes, and a billion-dollar syndication empire was visible to everyone watching within approximately 5 minutes. The 6 people who hadn't met before stood in a parking lot and were immediately, obviously, completely right together. The network stopped pushing for alternatives. The conversation ended. Nobody needed to explain anything. The show ran for 10 years. The cast stayed together for all of it, and it started in a parking lot where nobody was supposed to be having a meeting.